This story is generated and narrated by AI. Please excuse any occasional glitches in the voice. Your feedback helps us improve. Imagine this. You're an urban anthropologist, trained to document cultures and forgotten beliefs. But when you visit a remote village in the Appalachian Mountains, you discover a ritual that doesn't just survive, it remembers you. And once you enter the final circle, there is no walking away. My name is Mark Halden. I'm a doctoral candidate in cultural anthropology at Columbia University, or at least I was. What I'm about to tell you wasn't meant to be a story. It was supposed to be a field report, a straightforward study of folk rituals and Appalachian oral traditions. But some knowledge isn't meant to be recorded. Some things don't want to be studied. It started with a rumor, a local legend tucked inside the footnotes of a half-century-old folklore journal I found buried in the university archive. The author had interviewed a dying woman in Harlan County, Kentucky. She mentioned a village lost in the folds of the mountains where strangers go missing in the fire each spring. No names, no maps, no citations, just a line scratched out in pencil. Some say it's a place that still remembers the old ways. I was fascinated. I built my entire thesis proposal around the idea of persistent folk rites in isolated American settlements. After months of research, satellite image scans, and deep dive local record mining, I found something, a faint logging trail on an old federal forestry map, discontinued in 1974. Leading to a place labeled simply St. Eom. The name wasn't in any database. No birth records, no census entries, no death notices. I packed light, just a backpack, my audio recorder, a notebook, some clothes, and my camera, no firearm. I thought I was just going to talk to people, interview them, maybe photograph a few ceremonies, then get out. It took me almost 2 days to drive there from Lexington. As I climbed higher into the hills, cell service disappeared. The asphalt gave way to gravel, then to dirt, then nothing at all. Just the trail, twisting through a tunnel of pine and fog, the kind of silence you can feel under your ribs. It was late afternoon when I saw the sign, hand-carved, nailed to a leaning tree, "Welcome home." St. Eom, the word home, gave me pause. I wasn't from here, but something about it made me grip the strap of my backpack a little tighter. The village appeared like a bruise blooming out of the trees. About a dozen cabins, most of them wooden, some built partially into the earth. No electric poles, no wires, no satellite dishes, but smoke rose from chimneys. And I could hear the sound of chopping wood in the distance. People lived here, not tourists, not reenactors, actual people. I stepped into the main clearing and immediately noticed how quiet everyone got. Not hostile, just quiet, like they were waiting for something. Then an older man in a dark wool coat stepped forward. Broad frame, sun-worn face, eyes that never quite met mine. "You're Mark." It wasn't a question. I nodded, surprised. "Yes. I'm here researching, we know," he said. "You'll be staying with me, this way." He turned and walked off without waiting for a response. I glanced around. No one else moved, but they were all watching, even the children. His house was near the edge of the village, a 2-story structure with wide eaves and slate roof tiles. Inside was warmer than I expected. Wood stove, thick rugs, oil lamps that filled the space with a honey-colored glow. He gestured to the guest room and said simply, "You eat what we eat. Don't walk the woods after sundown. And when the bell rings, come to the square." Before I could ask about the bell, he'd already gone into the kitchen. I heard a kettle being set on the stove. That night, I couldn't sleep. The mattress was too soft, the house too silent, and outside, The trees creaked like something was leaning against them. I thought I saw movement through the slats of the wooden shutters. Just shapes. Nothing clear. I told myself it was my imagination or exhaustion. In the morning, the village looked different, brighter, almost, but in a way that felt like overexposure on film, colors too vivid, angles too clean. Children played with stones arranged in spirals. A group of elderly women sat on the porch humming in unison, something droning and slow. When I approached them with a smile and introduced myself, they stopped humming. One of them, the oldest, looked up at me and said, "You came just in time." I asked what she meant. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached out, took my hand, and turned my palm over. Then she frowned. "Not yet," she muttered, and let go. I spent the rest of the day trying to interview anyone I could, but the responses were evasive at best. They spoke in proverbs, half-rhymes, deliberately confusing metaphors. One man told me, "The fire remembers the breath that feeds it." Another, "They don't let the roots forget their names." But the one who disturbed me the most was a little boy, no more than 7, silent, with ash-gray eyes and a scar just beneath his left temple. He didn't speak, just stood near wherever I happened to be, watching. That evening, as I returned to the host's house, I noticed a circle of stones in the yard that hadn't been there before, carefully arranged, fresh earth beneath them. Inside, my host was sitting at the table, sharpening a knife slowly over a plate of uncooked roots. He didn't look up as he spoke. "You'll want to be rested. The bell's not far off now." "What bell?" I asked, but he just kept sharpening. That night, I dreamed of breathing trees, not swaying, breathing, as if the trunks expanded with each inhale and shivered with each exhale. I woke up drenched in sweat, the window shutter wide open. I didn't remember leaving it that way. Outside, the sky hadn't yet turned light, but I could hear movement, soft, like bare feet on soil. I crept to the window. No one was there, just the wind teasing the branches and a shape, too tall, too narrow, retreating into the woods. I didn't sleep again. Morning arrived with the smell of firewood and stew. My host didn't speak much as we ate. He just asked, "Did you dream?" I hesitated, then said no. He nodded, as if that confirmed something. By the third day, the rhythms of the village started to settle around me like a net I hadn't noticed being cast. No one ever seemed to leave. There were no cars, no roads beyond the one I came in on, and I hadn't seen any radios, much less phones or power. But food was always available. The people moved with a kind of wordless agreement, like they all shared a script I hadn't been given, and always they watched me. I tried to take photographs, once, but when I raised my camera toward one of the houses, the lens fogged instantly and the shutter jammed. It had worked fine the night before. That evening, the bell rang. It wasn't like any bell I'd heard before, not metallic, not sharp. It was deep, low, almost wet sounding, like something dragged across hollow bone. Everyone stopped what they were doing and turned toward the square. I followed them, notebook in my coat pocket, recorder tucked in my sleeve. The anthropologist in me burned with anticipation. In the center of the square stood a wide, flat stone, blackened by years of ash. Around it, lanterns had been set in precise points, forming a circle. The villagers gathered silently, old, young, all of them. My host stood at the front, holding a clay bowl. He looked up at me, then gestured, "You came to observe, so observe." What happened next wasn't violent, not in any obvious way, but it felt wrong. Not fake, not staged, just too old. Each villager approached the bowl, dipped their fingers into it, and drew a symbol across their chest, first in vertical line, then a half circle over the heart. When my host offered me the bowl, I hesitated. "What is it?" I asked. "Remembrance," he said. I declined. He didn't insist. They began to hum, the same drone I had heard the women use earlier, but layered now, deeper, vibrating in my teeth. Then the children started to circle the stone, walking backwards, eyes closed, as the adults chanted. It felt ritualistic, yes, but it also felt like they were being watched, not just by me, as if this rite wasn't a performance, but a requirement. That night, I found another circle of stones outside my door, this one larger, and beneath one of the stones, a feather, too black to belong to any local bird I knew of. I wanted to leave, but I hadn't seen my car since I arrived. I asked my host about it. He stared at me a moment longer than comfort allowed. "Leave," he repeated. "You only just got here." I pushed harder, demanded he show me the trail, said I didn't want to disrupt the village anymore. He sighed, then said something I've never forgotten. "You didn't come because you were curious. You came because something called you." I didn't respond. I just went back to my room and locked the door. That night, I dreamed again. Only this time, I wasn't the one dreaming. I could feel it, something else moving behind my eyes. I saw the village from above, like smoke watching from the trees. I saw the villagers gathered in my host's home, whispering, laying something out on the floor, and then I saw myself, lying asleep in bed. I woke gasping, and the door to my room was open, but no one was there. On the pillow next to me was a sprig of dry rosemary and a folded piece of bark with a symbol burned into it, the same one they'd drawn on their chests. I had to get out. The next morning, I packed my things, what little I had, tried to leave the house quietly, but when I stepped outside, the entire village was waiting, not angry, not violent, just waiting. The boy with the scar stepped forward. He looked up at me with those ash-colored eyes. "You can't leave once you're remembered." I backed away, then ran, into the woods, down what I thought was the old trail. But the path curved wrong, twisted back. The trees seemed to shift as I passed. Eventually, I found myself back at the clearing, back in the village. They hadn't moved. That's when I realized there had never been another way out. I don't remember walking back to the square, only that the forest folded behind me, like the trees let me go once I stopped trying to escape. The villagers were still there, waiting. My host stepped forward and placed a hand on my shoulder. It was firm, not aggressive, but final, a gesture less of comfort and more of ownership. "You've been chosen," he said. I didn't agree to anything. I never said yes, he nodded. "You didn't need to? That's not how it works." I tried to protest, to argue that I was an outsider, that I didn't belong here, but the words felt weak even to me, because something had been changing, something I couldn't deny. That night, they prepared the rite. They called it the returning, not a festival, not a sacrifice, a renewal. I watched as they painted symbols along the stone in the square, shapes older than any language I had ever studied. Not geometric, not chaotic either. They flowed, like roots or veins. The children carried in small bundles wrapped in burlap. One by one they placed them around the central stone, and when they opened, I expected bones or animals, but inside each one was a mirror, clouded, bent at the edges like old silver. and none of the mirrors reflected me. I moved between them slowly, looking down, trying different angles, but each one showed the villagers around me, the trees, the darkening sky, never me. My host noticed my confusion and said only this: "You're still being shaped. Once the ride is complete, the forest will know your face and you'll cast a reflection again." It was nonsense, yet I couldn't deny what I saw or didn't see. As dusk fell, the villagers changed into robes of woven moss and dyed bark, every robe different, but with the same shape stitched across the chest, a circle with a single line running down the middle, like a keyhole. They lit a ring of lanterns around the square, but these weren't like before. They didn't glow, they pulsed. Faint, like a heartbeat, each one timed with the next, creating a slow rhythm that filled the air like a pressure wave. And then, silence. The humming began. Low at first, a note that seemed to crawl out from under the stone, then layered again. Higher voices, older voices, some that didn't sound entirely human. I stood in the middle, surrounded, not restrained, but contained. My body wanted to move, to leave, but my feet would not lift. My host stepped forward with the bowl again, but this time, it glowed faintly, like something was alive inside it. He offered it to me. I didn't reach for it, but my hands moved anyway. Fingers dipped into the warm, wet substance, thicker than water, not quite blood. It smelled like iron, and something sweet, like crushed flowers left in the sun. Without thought, I painted the mark on my chest. The moment the curve touched my skin, my ears filled with sound. Not noise, but whispers, thousands of them, speaking a language I didn't know, and yet understood. They said, "You are no longer observed. You are now within." The mirrors around the stone flared white for a heartbeat and then went dark. I collapsed. They say I slept for 3 days. When I woke, it was raining. My bed was made of pine needles and carved wood. I was alone, except for a single child watching from the doorway. He smiled, and I remembered. Everything. Not just the rite, but the reason I had come, the calling I had felt. I thought it had been curiosity or instinct, but it had been a summons. I was never meant to leave, because I was never from the outside. That night, I walked into the square again, and this time, the mirrors reflected me, but something was different. My eyes, they weren't mine anymore. I began to move differently through the village, not as a guest, not as an outsider, but as someone whose presence no longer shifted the air, someone the forest recognized. The villagers no longer looked at me with curiosity or politeness. They nodded, like an old friend returning after a long absence. I asked my host about it, about what the rite truly did. He took a long time before answering, then said, "It isn't about binding you here. It's about reminding you where you belong." At first, I thought he meant metaphorically, a poetic phrase from an old man used to rituals and symbolism, but each day I stayed, that word, belong, grew heavier. I began to notice things I should have noticed earlier. There was no road out, not anymore. The forest path I came in on, the trail that brought me to Birchwell, it no longer led anywhere. I walked it, for hours, and found myself back at the square every time. But not like looping in a circle, more like the village had become the only fixed point. The sky moved, The sun rose and fell, but the woods outside the village no longer changed. Even the birds stopped flying overhead. Only crows remained, always watching. I started waking up with marks on my skin, faint at first, then deeper, like carvings, shapes I'd seen in the stonework, in the robes, always that circle, always that dividing line. One morning, I found the child from before sitting at the edge of the forest, staring into the trees. I sat next to him. He said, without turning, "They won't let you forget again." "Who won't?" I asked. He pointed at the tree-line, "The ones below, the ones you called to when you left." That's when the memories began returning, not visions, but a timeline. I had been here before, years ago, before the city, before university. I had come through this place as a boy, lost during a hiking trip with my father. I had wandered too far ahead, and the fog rolled in. I found the village. They welcomed me. They fed me. They showed me kindness. And they marked me. Just one drop of that same glowing liquid across my forehead while I slept. A simple invitation. But I left. My father found me the next day, unconscious, curled beneath a pine tree. I never remembered the village. Until now. The rite hadn't created a new bond. It had reawakened one I had broken. My host confirmed it. "You were one of ours, once. You passed through the first circle as a child, but you walked away before the second. This time, you stayed. That makes all the difference." That night, the square was full again, but this time, there were no mirrors, only stone and silence. I stood in the center, willingly. This was the final circle, the completion. Each villager stepped forward, one by one, not to speak, but to watch. Their presence wasn't passive, it was a witnessing. As if the rite needed not a performer, but an audience. And then, I saw him at the edge of the crowd. My father. Younger than I remembered, eyes glassy, vacant. He didn't speak, but he raised one hand and pointed to my chest. The mark I'd painted had grown darker. It pulsed. And then the ground split open. No violence, no shaking, just a slow, parting motion, as if the earth itself had been waiting. From below rose a shape, not monstrous, not grotesque, but unfathomable. A tangle of roots, bones, smoke, and something like time itself twisted into form. It had no face, but it knew me. And I knew it. It was the reason the village existed, the reason the rituals continued. The binding one. It didn't speak, it remembered. It showed me every moment I had ever lied to myself, every time I denied that I felt more alive in forests than in cities, that I was drawn to patterns older than language. And in return, it offered something: stay. Stay and become. I looked to the villagers. Not one of them smiled. They were waiting for my choice. And I stepped forward into the roots. The earth closed over me. I didn't die. I didn't sleep. I became. To anyone who finds this recorder, to anyone studying folklore or anthropology or old rituals, know this: Birchwell is not on any map, and it never was. It finds you when you're just detached enough from the world to slip through the cracks. If you hear the drums, or find the path covered in pine needles that never rot, turn back. Because once you're invited back into the circle, it never lets go. Not every village is on a map. Some only exist when you're ready to remember them. If this story unsettled you, hit that like button so others can find it too. Subscribe to Whispers in the Shadows for more stories that blur the line between memory and myth, and tell me in the comments.